Under these sands, there are proved deposits of 160 billion barrels of oil. Saudi Arabia and Iran and Kuwait, which have 130 billion barrels of oil, own more than half of the world's known oil reserves. For at least the next 15 years, our oil supply is going to depend largely on what these 3 countries and 8 other Middle Eastern countries with smaller oil reserves decide to do about their oil production. The leader of one of the countries is Colonel Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. Last month, he took over 51% of the Libyan properties and assets of Occidental Petroleum, Continental, Marathon, and Amerada Hess, and he was able to raise the price of their crude oil to almost $5 a barrel. 3 days ago, he nationalized 51% of the holdings of the remaining foreign oil companies, Exxon, Texaco, SoCal, Mobil, and Shell. These companies are, so far, resisting this action, refusing the terms offered by Colonel Gaddafi. But the question is, can they hold out, given the world oil shortage?
I don't know of any effective way that the consuming nations economically can get together to bring pressure on prices in the producing nations. The man with an essential commodity that's in short supply has a distinct advantage when he has no antitrust laws to worry about.
So priority number 1 of all priorities involves the skill of our diplomacy in working out the kind of arrangements with nations abroad that will provide the continuity of supply in the critical period ahead. This is the biggest problem of all.
In non-diplomatic language, that means that we'd better get along with the Middle Eastern nations because we're using almost 2 billion barrels more of oil a year than we produce. So unless we ration it, we're going to have to import it. We will have to import about 50% of our oil by the 1980s. Most of it from the Middle East, where our interests are complicated and conflicting.
Well, we have 3 sets of relationships in the Middle East, all involving the legitimate interests of the United States. First, we have an emotional interest in Israel, and some would go so far as to base a military commitment upon it. Second, we have a deep economic interest in Arab oil, and indeed our position as a major world power in the next 10 or 15 years is going to be heavily dependent upon continuity in the flow of that oil. Third, we've got an overriding strategic interest in avoiding a conflict with Russia in the Middle East. So the essence of our problem is to reconcile these 3 diverse sets of interests without doing undue damage to any one of them.
Why do we have to get our oil from the Middle East? A blunt answer is that we can't get the amount we need anywhere else. So we come back to those 3 countries. They have plenty of oil. But there are problems about our getting it. And one is that we're going to have to compete for it against other industrial countries like Japan and France, who are even hungrier for oil than we are.
Now this is what is called the scramble for oil. People wanting to get control of oil reserves at any cost.
Is such competition going on now?
Well, it is starting. It is starting.
There are 1 million people in Kuwait, living over one of the largest pools of oil in the world. A generation ago, they lived in mud huts. The average per capita income last year was $3,500. They are a modern, industrialized country, enjoying the kind of living standard they can afford. But their problem is this. The oil, which is their only natural resource, is not going to last forever.
Why has Kuwait put a limit on its production of oil?
For Kuwait to have decided to limit its production to 3 million barrels per day, I would advance 2 main reasons. One is that this is the only source of revenue we have, which is from oil. We don't have any other. And therefore, we want to ensure that it lasts as long as we can. Secondly, we are producing enough to give us sufficient income to finance our needs.
So we cannot count on Kuwait for help in the energy crisis. They will not increase their production to feed our oil needs. Iran has the third largest pool of proven oil reserves in the non-communist world. The Shah, who is the absolute ruler, has taken a different view of how to use his oil from the Kuwaitis. He's producing as much as he can, using the money he gets to modernize and industrialize Iran. As a result, Iran has one of the highest growth rates in the world. They're spending every penny they get from oil, and when they sell more oil, they rewrite their economic programs to spend the additional money. They know the oil is going to run out someday, so while they have it, they're selling it as fast as they can to anyone who can pay for it, without regard to politics.
Oh, we don't deal only with the major companies. We deal with everybody. We deal with smaller companies. We deal with bigger companies. As a matter of fact, we have oil. We can't drink it. We have to sell it, and we wish to sell it at the best price. And I could assure you that our people, when they deal on oil, they're very shrewd.
One of the shrewd benefits Iran has managed is to trade some of its oil for a share of ownership in the Ashland Oil Company, one of the big American independents. The Arab countries have wanted for a long time to share in the income from refining and marketing oil for the West. Now Iran has such a deal on American soil.
We have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the National Iranian Oil Company, under which they will require a 50% participation in our refining and marketing operations in New York State. They in turn will supply us with quantities of crude oil. And this is really the only way that the United States is going to be able to assure itself, in my opinion, of a stable supply of oil for the future. Ashland is definitely involved in negotiations on a number of fronts, including the Saudi Arabians, to mention one.
This barren patch of desert is perhaps the world's most expensive piece of real estate. It's the Ghawar oil field in Saudi Arabia, and it covers the world's richest pool of oil.
Saudi Arabia is over 80% desert. Its 6 million people are conservative, deeply religious. They still live in an underdeveloped country. And one of the problems of their oil is that it's bringing them billions of dollars every year.
How are they going to spend their share, which might amount to as much as $30 to $40 billion a year? Well, if they put it in balances throughout the world, I know of no monetary system that can sustain that. I know of no way that with balances such as that floating around the world that we can have a viable international trade situation. They could invest throughout the world. But after all, in 1 year, Saudi Arabia could buy all of General Motors at once.
Saudi Arabia is now producing 8 million barrels of oil a day. We want them to produce more. The question is whether they will do it or not.
If it is up to us only, I mean, if we're going to apply our internal requirements, then we will produce exactly what we can spend. And I think this shouldn't exceed the present level of production. Anything we will do beyond that will create a problem for Saudi Arabia, a financial problem. And there should be an incentive for that.
One incentive would be to help modernize Saudi Arabia. It's an ancient country. It needs schools, roads, hospitals. This year, the Saudis are completing their first nationwide telephone system. They're building sewers for their cities. So they will trade oil for our technical help. This sounds good for us, but in fact, there is a limit to how much oil we can get from Saudi Arabia, because we have to find a way to pay for it with our shrunken dollars, and they have to find a way to absorb all that money.
If Saudi Arabia cannot spend the money for the benefit of their own people, they might think, why not stretch out the oil? Why not cut back on producing oil? And that would sound like a fairly rational and wise decision on the part of the Middle Eastern nations, but it would be catastrophe for the world, because the world would not have the energy which it by then will desperately need.
So this is the dilemma we face. The oil we need is in Saudi Arabia. We need the oil more than they need our money. Thus the question is, what can we do for them? And this brings us into the arena of Middle East politics and the question of Israel. Our ties with Israel and our aid to Israel anger the Arabs. The more radical Arabs and the Arab guerrillas attack Saudi Arabia for being too close to the United States. Now our oil shortage is seen by some Arabs as a weapon to change a policy that they think is not what we tell them it is.
In actual practice, I believe that most Arabs would feel that the policy has not been even-handed. That is to say,
Frank Jungers is president of Aramco, the Arabian-American oil company. It's the largest crude oil producing company in the world. Saudi Arabia owns 25% of it. American oil companies, 75%.
We just were granted the first interview that King Faisal has ever given to American television. Why do you think he chose to speak out at this time?
I think the king now is very much concerned with his position in the Arab world as being the one who is still pro-American in the face of what the others feel. And now that he has had an opportunity for a company like NBC to come in here and to interview him, he has chosen this as a way to get across his feelings to the American public in a friendly, quiet way.
As a friend of the United States, we are deeply concerned that if the United States does not change its policy in the Middle East and continues to side with Zionism, then I'm afraid such course of action will affect our relations with our American friends, because it will place us in untenable position in the Arab world and vis-a-vis the countries which Zionism seeks to destroy.
If I am correct, His Majesty at one time said that oil and politics did not mix. Has something occurred in the last several months to change your thinking on these lines?
Undoubtedly, we are now under attack from the Arabs themselves because of our friendship with the United States, and we are accused of being in collusion with Zionism and American imperialism against the Arabs.
Your Majesty's remarks on this subject in the past have been interpreted to mean that Saudi Arabia might restrict its shipments of oil, particularly to the United States. Is that a correct interpretation?
We do not wish to place any restrictions on our oil export to the United States, but as I mentioned, America's complete support of Zionism against the Arabs makes it extremely difficult for us to continue to supply the United States petroleum needs and to even maintain our friendly relations with the United States.
Since Britain withdrew its forces from the Arab Gulf, Your Majesty, Several countries around the Gulf, including your own, have shown an interest in buying more modern weapons. Would you comment on that, please?
It is to protect themselves against the dangers of communism and Zionism. The Arab countries have been forced to strive to acquire such weapons and military preparedness as to be able to defend their stability, their homeland, and their independence.
Is there a relationship between these purchases of weapons and oil?
Well, I think we have to defend ourselves. And probably the outsiders will be more greedy when they look at a wealthy country. We attract their appetite. So we have to buy more arms for that, to defend ourselves.
The United States, which is by far the major supplier of arms to Israel, has also contracted to provide some $4 billion worth of arms to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and to Kuwait. The Soviet Union, for its part, is deeply involved in Iraq, as well as Syria, and to some remaining extent in Egypt. The Arab oil-producing states, quite naturally, are thinking about the leverage their oil wealth may provide them in their dispute with Israel and in their related dealings with the great powers who buy their oil.
If a country is selling oil to us and it then cuts that oil off unless we change our policy, I think that there is no better word than blackmail.
The Saudis have said they have no intention of cutting off our oil. They have said they're even prepared to increase their production. But in the last few days, they have come under increased pressure from Libya and Egypt to use their oil to force us to change our Middle East policy. In a telephone interview on Sunday, Saudi Petroleum Minister Yamani told NBC News this.
Our policy is strongly against nationalization.
That Saudi policy is strongly against nationalizing foreign oil holdings, that Saudi Arabia will carefully study all the consequences of the Libyan nationalizing action and then act accordingly, that there will probably be some modification in their present arrangement with us, that Saudi Arabia's policy toward the United States remains as stated by King Faisal on this program. Thus, more than ever, as a result of Libya's actions and the recent meeting between Sadat of Egypt and King Faisal, Saudi Arabian oil seems the key to what happens in the Middle East. Whether we like it or not, politics and oil are mixed. We need oil, and we need it from Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are our friends, but they are under pressure from the other Arabs because of Israel. Now they're putting pressure on us. And the pressure they have is our need for more oil. For almost 3 decades, we have been the richest, most powerful nation on earth. Now a nation of 6 million warns us we must change our foreign policy if we want full gas tanks. This is the world we can expect to live in until we begin to produce new fuels to replace the oil we no longer have.